I got this cute little succulent a little while ago from Mountain Crest Gardens. It came in a Haworthia plug tray that I ordered. Now, these plug trays aren't always labeled, and in my case, it was not. However, I knew it was a Haworthia or Haworthiopsis, and so that gives me a starting point. I went to add it to the Succulent Tracker app and realized I should probably figure out what variety it is because I have a lot of them and I know someone's gonna ask me at some point and I'd like to give them a little bit more specific answer other than it's just a Haworthia. I'm gonna show you the process I used to figure out what type of succulent this is. Now, I will say there's a variety of different ways to identify succulents. There's a lot of apps that you can use that will help you identify succulents. I've been growing succulents for over 10 years, and so I have a general idea of what most succulents are just by looking at them. One of the ways that you can also develop that skill is just by looking at a few different websites. So obviously I would recommend succulentsandsunshine.com, and on our types of succulents page, so you can click here on succulent types. If you scroll down, it'll give you an overview of different succulents. So this is just an image to represent each genus of succulent. And that's a great place to start. Just look at a bunch of succulents in a particular genus and help you better recognize the features that make those succulents the genus they are. Now, I have grown a lot of Haworthia, and within here, you'll see there's a lot of different varieties that show up. This is not an exhaustive list of Haworthia. And in fact, this little one that I got from Mountain Crest Gardens isn't one that I recognize the name of right off the bat. So I needed to dig a bit deeper to figure out what type it actually is. Now, because I bought it from Mountain Crest Gardens, I figured there's a good chance that they would have it on their website. So I went to mountaincrestgardens.com, and then in the menu, you can view succulents by their genus, and they have a whole bunch here to choose from. So I picked Haworthias, and I just started scrolling through and I'm looking for identifying features of this particular Haworthia. So you can see the most common, the zebra plant up here, has these very distinctive white stripes on it. This one does not have white stripes on it. It has a similar leaf pattern or leaf shape, but it's not the same. And it barely has little white dots on it. Not very many, but just enough that it is textured and it's not smooth. A lot of Haworthia you'll see have these kind of translucent, very smooth, bright green leaves. So I know it's not one of these. And as I scroll through, I'm really just looking for something that stands out as a potential option to match my succulent. This is one that's close, but I can already see the leaf shape on this is a little too wide. It's a much darker color than my Haworthia, but that can be just a matter of it not getting as much light as the one in this picture. Now this one has a bunch of clusters, which is very similar to the one I have here. However, it's still, these leaves are too fat, they just don't quite match. This is something that gets easier with time. And the more you identify, the more succulents you look at, the easier it is to find things that look similar to your succulent and get a closer ID. Now this one, this Cassitha, looks very similar to mine. It does have a bunch of white spots on it. I feel like it has a little bit more than my particular succulent does, but I'm gonna go ahead and open up that one and see what it looks like. And then I'm also gonna keep scrolling. This is another one. This has a ton of clusters. It's really smooth. It has super sharp pointy leaves, which this one does. Whenever I repot this one, I feel like I need to use gloves because it's so sharp and it really hurts when it sticks into your fingers. Now I'm just gonna finish scrolling through, see if I see anything else that looks like it might match, and then we'll pull those pages up separately and look a little bit closer. Okay, this is another one that has a ton of clusters on it. Now, sometimes they'll show a picture of just an individual succulent, but typically Mountain Crest will show a photo that represents that plant as it continues to grow and how it will look when it ships to you. That one looks like it could be a good match. Now, obviously Mountain Crest is also not an exhaustive list of Haworthias, but again, because I bought it from them, I figured it was a good place to start. So let's go back and let's look at those other succulents that looks like they could be a good fit. So here's the first one, this Haworthia Cassitha. And as we look in closer, you can see there are a lot of white dots on the edge. And this has some white dots, but they're not as distinct. Now, that could be just a matter of this succulent, since I've had it, wasn't getting quite enough light, so it was stretching out. But the other thing I'm noticing that's different on this one is these leaves are a little bit more rounded at the top. They don't come to quite as sharp a point, and they're not quite as narrow and thinning at the top. So while it could be this one, I think there's probably going to be a better option. So let's switch to this Haworthia viscosa. And this one does look like it has a lot of those sharp points, but as I'm looking at it closer, it seems like the inside is a lot smoother than mine and wider. These leaves seem a lot more narrow. They are a little bit underwatered, so they're kind of curved in, and the ones in the photo aren't doing that quite as much. But these just look too smooth. I'm looking at the edges of the leaves and the inside and the backside, and there's just not quite as much texture as there are here. So I feel like I'm looking for something that's in between that Cassitha and this viscosa. So let's go to the final one that I pulled up, and it is the last one I pulled up because I'm pretty sure this is the match. Now you'll notice there's only one plant here in this image, but if I scroll through, it actually shows one with a lot of clusters. And looking at this closely, I can see some white dots along the edge. So I'm seeing that texture on the back side of the succulents. I'm seeing super sharp points coming out. Theirs is a little bit more bright green. Mine's a bit darker, but overall, with all the other characteristics, I feel like this is probably the best match. For the most part, even all of these different 3 succulents that we looked at, they're going to have very similar care needs to each other. And at the end of the day, if you know how to care for your succulent, or the way you're caring for it is working and the plant is growing healthy, it really doesn't matter what the name of it is, unless you become a collector and you want to make sure you have specific varieties in your garden. I'm going to go ahead and get this plant added to the succulent tracker app as Haworthia tortuosa and call it good from there. And as with other Haworthias in my collection, it'll go on the lower shelf where it will get 12 hours of grow light exposure about 18 inches above the plant. I'll also water this pretty infrequently. Most of my Haworthias I tend to water about once a month, sometimes a little bit more, maybe every 3 weeks if I see that they're starting to get really dried out. Hopefully this little example has given you an idea of what to look for when you're identifying succulents. Almost always the differences in species come down to little differences in the width of a leaf, the point that it comes to, how much it clusters or puts off offsets, the color, and the texture of the leaves. There's a lot of things that play into identification, and with so many hybrids coming out in these recent years, a lot of times it's hard to get an exact ID, but as long as you're close enough and the care routine that you're giving your succulent is working to keep it alive, that's what counts. If you would like to get my help in identifying your succulents, I would love to invite you to join our Succulent Lovers Club. Identifying succulents is one of the services that we offer to our club members. I will go through this exact process to identify your succulents and get as close as we can to the actual ID for your plant. Of course, on top of that, we also have monthly calls where you can ask questions about your succulents. We have a community forum area where you can share what you're doing with your succulents, get help, be inspired by other club members. And then we also have frequent workshops from guest experts, and you can access all the replays of those and learn more in depth about how to care for your succulents. To join, just check out the link in the description, and we'd love to see you there.